Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Courtney King, and today's short talk is going to be about corporate feedback culture. Now, this is a video that I've been wanting to make for a while now, just because I have a lot to say on this topic. And I would like to just get right into it. First of all, let's talk about what corporate feedback culture even means. I feel like there's been this huge uptick in like radically transparent feedback culture. You'll see this when you apply for jobs in the corporate world. It doesn't just have to be in tech. You might have experienced it in industries totally unrelated to the corporate world. And essentially what it means is employers say that they want to create a culture where everyone gives each other continuous feedback, right? It's like this continuous feedback loop where you're always either giving positive feedback or constructive criticism all the time, right? About everything. And I think there's a couple big problems with the way that this is handled. I think in theory, it is totally fine, right? Theoretically, it is good to have feedback on what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. But there's certain aspects that I have some problems with. So let's just dive right into it. My biggest issue, I think, with corporate feedback culture is that it's not regulated in this way, in that employers truly mean feedback about anything, no matter how small or inconsequential, all the time, every day, with no breaks, like a steady stream of feedback from your leadership about everything. This is kind of like problematic for a couple of reasons. Number one, if someone's trying to work through a project or a problem, it can be helpful to stop them every 2 minutes and give them feedback. But imagine you're trying to cook a meal in a kitchen and you have things that you need to work through, problems you need to sort out. I don't have this ingredient, I need to find that ingredient. Do I have one of those pieces of equipment? No, let me find something else. It is not super helpful to have your roommate stand there and watch what you're doing and be like, oh no, you need to do that better. Like, oh, you're stirring that pretty well, but I would have used this spoon. You know, next time you microwave something, I might try 25 seconds instead of 30 seconds. Imagine what that would be like. Just like not very helpful and also extremely annoying. And also it would slow you down and it would actually inhibit your creative problem solving. I think that this happens in the workplace all the time. And because so many people work remotely and communicate with their leadership and communicate with their teammates remotely, even if they are working in an office, it can be really, really noisy. So you can have Slack messages popping up all the time, emails popping up all the time, whatever, messaging services your company uses popping up all the time with these little pieces of feedback with really no context around them. And also it's hard to express emotion via these little messages. And so it can kind of feel like you're getting a little poked by your boss all day, every day. And I'm not someone that believes that every tiny little thing that could be done better actually needs to be mentioned, right? Like if you would have written this in blue ink, but I wrote it in black ink, is that really something that we need to have like a talk or a discussion about? Or is it just a difference in the way that we do things? Sometimes I think it's the latter. I think sometimes your team just has a different way of looking at things or a different way of doing things that isn't wrong. It's just not how you personally would have done it. And a lot of people's feedback comes from that place. Someone is doing something that isn't wrong or harmful. It's just not the way that you would have done it. And because there's this pressure to upkeep the corporate feedback culture, it puts managers in a place where they feel like, well, I need to say something about everything. And I just think that's a bad precedent to set. I also think that it slows down your workflows because you're having to stop and reconsider. It makes you doubt yourself. It makes you second guess every little decision that you're making. You're like, I'm just writing a standard email to my customer, but is this the way that my boss would have worded it? Maybe my boss would have used different grammar here. Should I run this by them first? It just creates a lot of doubt that I think is totally unnecessary. There's also typically leaders will not ask if you have any preferences around how you'd like to receive feedback or when you would like to receive feedback. So some people prefer to receive feedback in the moment, right? Like the moment they do something where you feel like you could give them some constructive criticism, they want to know then and there. That's just how they like to receive it. Then some people would like you to just keep that to yourself, compile it, right? Maybe make a list of notes of your feedback for them and give it to them at a specified time. So maybe during your weekly call with your boss, or, a catch-up call after a customer call, you want to do a debriefing. And, okay, let's go over what could have been done better. Some people prefer that way. It doesn't really matter how you prefer to receive feedback, but I think your boss should ask. I think your leadership should want to know those things. That's part of being a good leader, is leading everybody differently in a way that is best and will help grow them as a person. My experience is that not much of this goes down. Pretty much every leader kind of just interjects with feedback whenever they feel like it. And they don't often bother to get context around the situation first. Feedback can be very reactive if you allow it to be. Maybe you just see one thing on Slack, or you hear one thing on a call or from someone else, and you immediately want to give feedback about it. But maybe you don't know the history of why this conversation is going down the way that it's going down. I've had this happen numerous times where I write a pretty innocuous message to a customer on Slack. My boss sees it, takes some sort of issue with something small in it, and then writes me a whole paragraph about why they would have said it differently. But they don't have any context on it, right? They don't have any context on my relationship with this particular customer, on the health of the customer's account, on any background information about, whatever problems the customer may be working on. And so ultimately, you've kind of made me doubt myself over something that you actually don't have a lot of information around. It's unhelpful, and it just makes your team member less likely to actually integrate that feedback or listen to feedback in the future. So I think that's another big part of it, is sort of this lack of context, and no asking about how do you best receive feedback. I think that's a really important thing. I also think that there's a lot of pressure placed on managers from the top down to give negative feedback, even when there isn't any. I think that leaders feel like, well, in order to be a good leader, I need to tell you how you can improve. So they'll start fishing for things, or they'll make something up, or they will use an example of something that you could have done better, or something that didn't go the right way. Even if that thing was completely outside of your control, they'll sort of bring that up in your review. And it's like, okay, that's interesting. That's not a piece of feedback that would actually help me improve, because I had no control over that situation. But sure, I'll write that down, I guess. And this is an issue because, in creative professions or the creative world, like if you do theater, or maybe you cook for a living, or you make art, whoever is assessing your creative work, it's possible to have no notes about the work. Like, okay, I ate your dish that you just cooked. I don't have any notes. There's nothing to improve. And I feel like in the corporate world, managers feel like they don't have that option. Like they're a bad manager if they just don't have any notes for you. They have to have notes for you. There's always something to improve. And yeah, at a high level, that's true. As a person in a specific role, as a company, there is always something to improve. But if we're just talking about like a phone call with a customer, or just talking about a presentation or something, sometimes there's no notes. Everything was satisfactory, right? And it's okay to say that. It's just okay to be like, look, I thought you did good. I don't really have anything to say. I have literally, maybe I'm going to out myself as a bad employee here, but I've never had a leader ever say that in the corporate world. Just like, hey, you know what? It's always, I thought that was 99.9% good. The only thing I would say is when you introduce yourself, maybe try saying your last name first and your first name last, or something like really like not super relevant. I'm someone who actually likes constructive criticism, and I will integrate it. That's one thing that I pride myself on, is being coachable. So I will integrate the things that you tell me and try to improve, from one day to the next, from one quarter to the next, whatever it is. However, I do know when someone is fishing just for random things to say because they feel like they have to have something to say. And I just think it's not very useful. My last and final thing about this topic is that I believe that feedback culture should truly be a loop, in that it should flow equally from the top down to the bottom up. And even if your leadership is open to feedback, it is often just seen as sort of like a nice suggestion, more than like, no, this is constructive criticism. This is something that you or, the rest of the leadership team actually could stand to improve. Oftentimes, even feedback from the bottom up that happens at a team level. So an entire team has a piece of feedback for leadership. I just think often, more times than not, it sort of falls on deaf ears. They're happy to, talk to you about it, but it's not something that they're necessarily going to follow up on. They're kind of like, thank you for sharing that, right? Whereas if you receive feedback as an independent contributor, it is typically going to be documented, and your boss will typically follow up on it. And if you have not improved on it, there's going to be a second conversation that's a little bit spicier than the first. Sometimes I wish that would happen the other way around. Like, if I'm telling the leadership team that you guys could stand to work on this topic, and we've all told you this numerous times, and there's just been, how many times does this happen at your job? You give your boss feedback multiple times, everybody does, and they just don't listen. Nothing ever changes. This happens in the corporate world as well. And for me, that's like unacceptable. For me, that's like a sign of a leadership team that is not quite as healthy as it could be. Being open to feedback is not something that just people at the bottom of the totem pole need to be aware of. It's something that people at the top of the totem pole especially need to be aware of. And I understand that when you're in a leadership position, you're getting it from all sides. Every single person has an idea on how you could be doing your job better. I've been in management positions. They're extremely hard. I'm not trying to say that they're not. However, you do need to be working to integrate those things. And for me, that just doesn't happen as much as I would like. So all that said, I think there's this final issue where like corporate feedback culture is wrapped in this presentation of toxic positivity, which I've talked about, especially with American tech companies before in some of my other videos. If you haven't watched those, go check them out. Yeah, this toxic positivity thing where not only do you have to accept the constructive criticism, you are not allowed to really explain yourself. Not that you should push back or be like, no, I don't, but just explain yourself like, hey, this is why I chose to do it this way, or this is the thought process that I came to. There's really no expectation that you would do that. I feel like that's kind of viewed as insubordination. You sort of need to just be quiet and take the feedback, and also be in a really good mood about it. Like, yay, I'm so happy that you gave me extensive feedback about this just average slide deck that I made for a regular customer call. I just think that it's too intense, right? And it's sort of like how if your parents nag at you about something repeatedly, you just sort of tune it out. That happens with team members and team leaders as well. I think if you're trying to be an effective team leader, it's really important to, number one, figure out the best way to deliver this constructive criticism. That's going to vary person by person. Number two, do not sweat the small stuff. It doesn't matter if you would have slightly worded an email a slightly different way. That's, in the grand scheme of things, not super important. And I think you want to focus on the biggest pieces of feedback that are going to have the most value add. And also to be open to feedback yourself, not just hearing it, but also applying it in your everyday. Okay, that's my rant done for today. Thank you guys for watching. Before I go, please like, subscribe, hit the bell icon. I work really hard on these videos, and when you guys interact like that, it really helps me out with the algorithm. So I really, really appreciate it. Other than that, thanks again, and I will see you in the next one.